Betsy Devos has wasted $1 billion on promoting for-profit charter schools that destroy public education. How much longer is this obscene destruction of our commons going to continue? Leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe. New report reveals how charter schools have scammed the U.S. government for up to $1 billion. I should add, I started to add before, my writing is syndicated by the Independent Media Institute.org as well. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
So tell me about this this report that is talking about how charter schools are scamming you and me and all the rest of the taxpayers here in the United States. And how did they add it up to $1 billion, and what does Betsy Devos have to do with it?
The report I co-authored with Carol Burris, who's the executive director of the Network for Public Education. She and I had noticed that for years, the Department of Education's own Office of Inspector General had warned the department repeatedly that money that was being given from the federal government's charter school program was at risk because many of these schools that received the money were not opening, or they were opening and then would soon close. We also noticed with alarm that since Betsy Devos has become the Secretary of Education, that the budget for the charter school program has increased significantly. And we all know, of course, how big of a fan she is about charter schools and all forms of school choice. So we started looking into the history of this charter school program, the grant program. It goes back into the 90s during the Clinton administration. But it was only in recent years that the program got really big and started making really enormous grants. I think the typical average gift to a charter school is some $450,000. But the charter school grant, and then the charter school grant program gives much larger grants to states. And the states then turn that money over and give it to charter schools. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that goes to the state. By our best estimates, about $4.1 billion has been spent through this grant program. And by our estimate, maybe as much as $1 billion of that money was wasted on charter schools that never opened or opened for brief periods of time.
So tell me how the scam works. I mean, what I'm imagining is, you know, hey, the federal government has grant money for charter schools available. I will go down, spend $200, incorporate a nonprofit corporation as a charter school. I'll find a property that's for lease, and I'll say, okay, this is the property I'm going to lease. I've created the corporation. I establish a paycheck for myself of, let's say, $100,000 a week. And then I apply to the federal government saying, you know, give me $1 million. I'm going to start a charter school. They give me the $1 million. I pay myself a couple $100,000 for the work that I've done. I look around and say, gee, there's no money left over. I guess we're just going to bankrupt this corporation, do so, and walk away. I mean, is that how it works, or is it more sophisticated than that?
Actually, it's easier than what you've suggested. Charter schools, in order to apply for the grants, do not even have to have a location.
Wow.
They do not, correct. They do not even have to have their contract complete with the chartering agency, whether it's the state or some independent group. There are a number of instances we found where charter schools without locations, without a charter, without even full staff, were able to apply for and receive very large grants and then, in turn, not open up.
That is mind-boggling. I have heard or read that about half, maybe more than half, of all the schools in my home state of Michigan, which is Betsy DeVos's home state, it's where her billions were made. You know, and well, they were made all over the country through Amway, but or at least her husband's billions. But that about half the schools in Michigan now have been privatized, much to the detriment of many of the public schools. A, is that true? B, are those trends happening in other states? And C, what role did Betsy DeVos have this kind of bizarre legislation, or, you know, really government subsidies for private schools? What role did that play?
Well, to answer the first question about Michigan, yes, Michigan has a lot of charter schools, and a lot of those schools, I don't have an exact count, but many of them received government grants from the federal government and then did not open or quickly closed. I know that we did look closely at California and found that nearly 40% of the charter schools in California that received federal grants either did not open or quickly closed. So we think our estimate of maybe as much as a third of these schools closing or staying open for brief periods of time is in fact a conservative count. As you know from being a Michigan native also, 85% of the charter schools in Michigan are for-profit organizations, which means that that money, much of it goes directly into private pockets. We found many of the grants went to charter schools that are for-profit that conduct what we call related party transactions. In other words, the money pays for a lease that is owned by a company that is headed by the same person who heads the charter school. In other words, the charter school is basically just a pass-through. Devos, of course, was a big proponent and always has been of vouchers. Her advocacy for charters is a little more recent because they are politically more palatable. For instance, you probably know that many Democrat politicians support charter schools. The Obama administration supported the charter schools program and indeed did a lot to increase it, specifically by requiring school districts that wanted federal grant money coming from other programs to remove any caps to charters. So it's been a bipartisan effort to create this monstrosity, but we've seen that more recently the nature of the program is likely getting worse. First of all, because every year, despite the Trump administration wanting to cut the education department's budget, it has asked for and received grant funding increases for the charter grant program. This year, Trump asked for a 13% increase to the program, which would bring the total amount to $500 million annually that this program would receive to then pass on to charter schools. We also noticed that the nature of the applications to these for these grants are getting much more problematic. Many of the schools are even sketchier than schools that received the money in the past. So we're worried that things are likely getting worse under the DeVos administration. So
I remember back, 15 years ago or thereabouts, this movie Waiting for Superman, as I recall was the title, came out, and it was basically a sales pitch for charter schools. You had Bill Gates and his foundation behind it. You had the Clinton family behind it. You had, a lot of people who are considered forward thinkers or visionaries or, advocates for a positive future, buying into this story that if we just brought choice to education and the profit motive to education, then, those wonderful things that happen in the free marketplace, in quotes, would happen in education. And wouldn't that be great? How, first of all, where did that start? Secondly, how extensive did that worldview become? I mean, you just documented it captured apparently the minds of Barack and Michelle Obama as well. And what's it going to take to kill it? Or is there some truth to it?
The argument originally for charter schools was perhaps compelling. It goes back some time, well into the 80s, primarily coming up from the state of Minnesota. But it has always had this energy of entrepreneurialism to it and a belief in the free market system and competition. That has always been problematic for education because when you have competition, there are winners and losers. And in the case with schools that are competing with charters, oftentimes the students who are the most troubled, who struggle the most, are the ones who are left out. We saw, for instance, in our examination of charter schools that received federal grants, many of the charter schools that got the grants do not, in fact, accept all students. Some of them will even say on their website that only students with mild disabilities are a good fit for our school. We saw charter schools located in neighborhoods that are mostly black and brown students that had primarily white students enrolled in their courses. So I think the grassroots of charter schools, the deep roots of it, were always a problem, and now that the footprint of the charters is getting large enough to, I think charter schools enroll about 6 to 7% of students nationwide. They're having significant impacts in particularly urban areas where up to 20, 30, 40% of students are enrolled in charters. You're starting to see what many people warned years ago, that this movement, this new industry, and it's what they call it themselves, they call it an industry, is misguided and needs to be reined in.
And it's going to kill public education. I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 7 years, and my recollection is that most of the D.C. schools are now privatized. Am I recalling incorrectly?
I believe about 40 or 50% of the students in D.C. Attend charter schools. I may not have that quite right, but it's a significant number.
I've had conservatives tell me that that's a wonderful thing. Is it?
Well, not unfortunately. Even some left-leaning people will tell you it's a wonderful thing, because the charter school public relations campaign has been quite adept at convincing people that this is, quote, the civil rights cause of our time. Arnie Duncan used to love to use that phrase. Ironically, President Trump has used it too. So I think that it's a testament to the charter school industry's ability to get people to believe their marketing campaigns, including many well-meaning people. I don't mean to disparage all charter schools. There are some that likely are doing good work.
Real quick question, Jeff. We're talking to Jeff Bryant, his newest piece on charter schools. Real quick question. Is it true that charter schools broadly outperform public schools?
No, not at all. It's mixed results at best.
Okay, great. Jeff Bryant, thanks